I first found out about Phil when I read his letter to the Mercury News, which got published a couple of months ago. And I'd like to read that. It's very short. He starts out saying, "When I joined the military, I believed in my heart that the United States did not torture. Only the bad guys did that. I believed that if I was captured, it was possible that I might be spared torture because the United States did not do that, and the enemy might not want to open that door. The President, our Commander-in-Chief of the American military, our leader, has declared that torture works and plans to review how America conducts the, quote, the war on terror, end quote. Torture is morally reprehensible, illegal under United States and international law, and wrong, period. Americans should hang their head in shame. We live in a nation where our leader is willing to embark on a regimen that will lead the United States and other countries back onto the slippery slope, the dark, evil art of torture. What are our values as a nation?" So after reading that, I found that very compelling, since I was part of the anti-war movement during the 1960s. I decided to contact Philip. I did that through email and asked him whether he wanted to give a presentation to this group, and he decided in the affirmative. So let's give a Humanist House welcome to Phillip Pflager. Oh yeah, that's right.
Good morning. You already know I'm Phil Pflager. I'm the chapter contact for Veterans for Peace in San Jose, California, the South Bay Peninsula chapter, Chapter 101. And we are a community partner with the San Jose Peace and Justice Center. And I'm here today to introduce you to Veterans for Peace and tell you a little bit about our goals. Veterans for Peace is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so we don't discuss politicians or promote politicians in any way. Veterans for Peace is an international organization with chapters in Vietnam, England, and Ireland, and over 120 chapters in the United States. And I would like to start off with the Veterans for Peace Statement of Purpose. It's very short, and it'll give you some idea of the goals of Veterans for Peace and what we hope to achieve. And one of the parts of Veterans for Peace Statement of Purpose that I won't say is that, or I won't read it, it says that we are obligated to carry out our goals with nonviolent means. That's very important. Veterans for Peace seeks to end war as an instrument of national policy. Veterans for Peace seeks justice for veterans and victims of war. Veterans of Peace seeks to end the arms race and eliminate nuclear weapons. Veterans for Peace seeks to stop our government from interfering in the internal affairs of other nations. And Veterans for Peace seeks to increase awareness of the costs of war. And the costs of war go beyond death, it goes beyond money, it goes to the very soul of this nation. How does our nation treat other nations? How do we treat each other? How do we treat those that are different? And how does our government treat us? And we now see police officers dressed in military-style uniforms, carrying military weapons, driving military vehicles. And when police departments are given military paraphernalia, serve and protect can easily become seek and destroy. Now across the nation we see militarization of police. For instance, in Connecticut there's a bill in the House, the Connecticut House, that if approved will allow police to use weapons, lethal weapons on drones. Now I went to a council meeting in San Jose, and in San Jose the police department was speaking and they were asking for drones so that they could seek lost children along the creek, which is fine, but what else would they do with these drones? We don't know. In Dallas, Texas, in 2016, the police put a bomb on a robot and they sent this robot off to kill an ambushed suspect. Now, it doesn't take much imagination to think about bombs on drones to kill suspects. And it's like what we do in the Middle East with drones. At Super Bowl 50 in Santa Clara County, we saw police dressed in camouflage uniforms, carrying military weapons, wearing military helmets, riding in military vehicles. And the military was there with helicopters and machine guns. And I believe that it's necessary to have increased security at high-profile events. But it sounds to me like they were looking for some kind of a war. I don't understand why they were so heavily armed for that event. Now, this is the war coming home. This is the cost of war. Veterans for Peace has several projects to complete their goals. And they have national projects, they have chapter projects, and they have individual projects, of course. We can all have our own projects as long as they're peaceful projects. And one of the projects that I'm interested in is called Full Disclosure. And that came about in 2012 when Congress allocated $65 million for a 13-year-long commemoration of the Vietnam War. And Veterans for Peace started the Full Disclosure Project to make sure that the government doesn't try to whitewash that war. And the government has a web page, and Full Disclosure has a web page. And on the Full Disclosure web page, you can read the words of the veterans that were in Vietnam. You can read all about the Vietnam War. If you look on the government web page, you'll see other things. And I hope that the government presents the whole story. That's the goal of Full Disclosure, is to make sure the government tells the truth and presents the whole story. And part of that story is events like the My Lai massacre, which wasn't an isolated event. And the whole story of Vietnam should be presented, just not the parts that they want to present. Now, Full Disclosure also published a newspaper. And unfortunately, the newspaper was a short run. And I was buying packets of the newspaper and distributing them for free. And I was fortunate in that I was able to get a Full Disclosure packet today to bring. They're on the table there for free. And Barbie Ulmer gave me some other newspapers from the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. They're there for free. And there are things on the table that I want to take home. So if you have any doubt, ask me, because I brought some things for display, and there's things that are for free, like the newspapers. And the other publication that Veterans for Peace published was called Peace in Our Times, and I've just got a few copies that you can have. I was waiting for another packet. The spring issue isn't quite out, so I didn't have them here today. Now, one of the Veterans for Peace members that wrote an article in the Full Disclosure newspaper is called S. Brian Wilson. You might remember S. Brian Wilson from 1987 when he was run over by a train, a military train in Concord, California. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. His article in that newspaper describes his time in Vietnam, and he was a captain in Vietnam. And he was sent out on a mission to determine if the bombs that were dropped on a village in a free fire area, which means anybody that moves in that area can be killed. They sent him to this village to see if they actually hit anything with their bombs. So he went out, he had to drive out with another South Vietnamese officer. And when he got to that village, he was so disturbed, it was a life-changing experience. And he just couldn't believe what he saw at this village. So shortly thereafter, he returned to the United States, and he was separated from the Air Force in the position as a captain. And then he started working on peace projects. And sometime in the 80s, he got the idea that he should go to El Salvador and Nicaragua to see what the U.S. government was doing there. Because at that time, the Reagan government was claiming that the Contras were the freedom fighters, and the Congress was funding these freedom fighters, so-called freedom fighters, and the CIA was training them. So Brian Wilson went down to El Salvador, Nicaragua, and what he saw down there disturbed him as much as what he saw in Vietnam. So when he came back, he got together with a group that was protesting the trains that were taking munitions from the Concord Naval Station to send down to El Salvador and Nicaragua. And they were successful in slowing down and stopping the trains by standing on the tracks. Well, one day he stood on the tracks and, say what?
Sat.
Oh, sat on the tracks. They were sitting on the tracks. And one day he was sitting on the tracks and the train didn't stop, it sped up. And he was unable to jump out of the way. He lost both his legs, was seriously injured, and almost died from that experience. Now he has written a book, which I brought just to show you, called Blood on the Tracks. And he made a video called Paying the Price for Peace. And he has a website where both these are available. And on his website, he has a lot of really good articles that he has written talking about his experiences and his beliefs. So if you're interested in Brian Wilson, you can look it up on the website of Brian Wilson. Now, I attended a presentation by Kevin Danaher, co-founder of Global Exchange. And it was about an hour-long presentation, so I'm just going to give you what I got out of it in a few minutes. Kevin Danaher said, violent solutions are not lasting solutions, and they very often cause problems worse than the original problem. So therefore, peaceful solutions are the best, but there could come a day when you don't have a choice. You have to use a violent solution. In that case, you're going to have to be prepared to deal with the problems that are going to arise from that solution. And I bring that up because I'm constantly running into people that say, oh, we could have won Vietnam because, or let's turn the desert into glass, drop a bunch of atomic bombs there, or kill them all, let God sort it out. And there's a young man called Mark Moyer who wrote, on May 19th of this year, he wrote an article in the New York Times, and it's one of these op-ed articles, and he's a member of Foreign Policy Research Institute, and he was born in 1971, and he decided that, yes, of course we could have won the war, and here's why, and he tells why in his article. And he said that he got interested in the Vietnam era in college, and then later on in graduate school he studied it extensively, and he claims he came across some documents that were written in Vietnamese, and some linguist translated these documents, and when he read them, he instantly understood how we could have won in Vietnam. And he also said that the American people were against the war because the government just didn't try hard enough to convince us to be for the war. And I would have to tell Mr. Moyer that I was there and he wasn't, and the government certainly did try hard enough. It wasn't for lack of trying. Because Mark Moyer was born in 1971. That would make him about 5 years old when the Vietnam War ended. And he's a member of the Foreign Policy Research Institute and the Center for Military and Diplomatic History. And I don't know anything about these groups, but I'm sure that they wouldn't agree with the goals of Veterans for Peace. Another project of the National VFP is called the Golden Rule Project. And you might have heard of the Golden Rule. It was a ship, a sailing ship. And in 1958, there was, the United States was conducting above ground nuclear tests near the Marshall Islands. So this group of activists decided that they would sail this ship over to the Marshall Islands and disrupt these nuclear tests. And they let the news media know what they were doing, and they headed off for Hawaii. And when they tried to leave the Honolulu port, they were arrested and jailed. And the Golden Rule didn't make it to the nuclear test, but it raised awareness of the problem of nuclear testing and got people interested and willing to talk about it. So they sold the Golden Rule, and it passed from hand to hand for many years. And it ended up in Humboldt Bay and sunk in a storm in 2010. And there was a local boatyard owner, Leroy Zerlang, decided he was going to get that boat out of the water, which he did. He pulled it up onto the shore. And after he did a little research on the history of the boat. Don't know if it's a ship or a boat. I wasn't in the Navy. So anyway, it's a boat. Okay, so he did some research on that boat and decided that they should restore it. And he started looking around for people to do that. And then two VFP members, Freddie Champagne and his wife, came upon the scene. And they talked to Mr. Zerlang, and he agreed to give them space and some tools and material, and they started working on the boat. So then Freddie started raising money and getting volunteers to help on the boat. And the project got big, and Veterans for Peace took it over. So it's now a national project of Veterans for Peace. And in 2015, they finally got the boat shipshape. And they sailed it to the Veterans for Peace Convention in San Diego in 2015. They sailed all the way down the coast, stopped at about 30 ports. San Francisco and Santa Cruz were two. And then they sailed back to Humboldt Bay. And the idea of this ship is when they sail into a port, it's a big ship. I think I have a picture here. Good. And a big boat, sorry. And it brings people's attention, and then they have an opportunity to talk to people and discuss the nuclear problem that we have with nuclear weapons. So in 2016, they took it to Portland for the Fleet Week Parade of Ships and the Parade of Roses, and they couldn't take the boat into the parade, but they did sail by the assemblage of people that were waiting for the parade while members of Veterans for Peace walked along the shore passing out information and talking about nuclear weapons. And also in 2016, they joined the Hiroshima Day activities at Green Lake, Washington, Nagasaki Day protest flotilla near Bangor, Tri-Bent submarine base. And for 2017, they have a plan to go all the way down to San Diego again, June through August, and they're going to stop at about 30 ports again along the way. They're going to be at San Francisco. They're going to sail all the way up to Sacramento. They're going to be at Half Moon Bay and Santa Cruz and many other ports along the way. Because theoretically, this boat could go to every port on the West Coast, every port on the East Coast, and sail all the way up the Mississippi to ports. And they'd have the opportunity to get people's attention and talk to them. Now, Golden Rule is accepting applications for captains and crew. And if you give them a donation of $100, you get one of these nice certificates. They'll take any amount. They'll be happy to take any amount of money. So if you're interested in sailing, that'd be a good thing you could do. Another project of Veterans for Peace that started in 1990 was Veterans for Peace established a non-governmental organization relationship with the United Nations. And Veterans for Peace is not a part of the United Nations, nor do they speak for United Nations or use their logos. But they work through the UN's Department of Public Information, and they have the opportunity to talk to other NGOs, and they can communicate with the UN representative for the United States and maybe even possibly comment to the President and Congress about keeping current on the treaties we're supposed to agree to. And for the future, they're going to seek a consultative status upgrade, which could give them a little more talking power in the United Nations. Now, over in Iraq, in 1999, Veterans for Peace started the Iraq Water Project. And that was in response to the sanctions regime that was placed on Iraq, and it destroyed the water system, and many other things collapsed. So Veterans for Peace partnered with the Islamic American NGO called Life for Relief and Development. And during the years of 1999 to 2003, before the invasion, they were able to put in 10 small to medium water systems. And then once there was the invasion, they had to change their what they were doing, and they turned to smaller units of ultraviolet and reverse osmosis. And these units are small, and they cost $1,000 to $1,500. And they put in as many of those as they can, depending on the funds they have coming in. And as of today, they put in 150 of those small units in schools and hospitals. And they worked with a three-man Iraqi team for years, and that finally disbanded because of death threats to the Iraqi team. And the project manager of Life for Relief and Development was murdered. So it's a dangerous place to work, and they're now working with a student team to carry this project on. And they hope someday that Iraq will be able to provide for their own water needs. In Korea, we have the Korean Peace Campaign, which hopes to achieve a peaceful end to the lingering Korean War. And presently, we have an armistice with Korea. Veterans for Peace would like to see a treaty signed to end the Korean War. It's been going on for too long. So that was launched in 2002, and they sent delegations to Korea. One of the delegations stood in solidarity with Korean villagers who were protesting military bases being built on their soil. And in 2009, they worked with other groups to start the national campaign to end the Korean War. So that's still ongoing because the Korean War is still ongoing. And over in Iraq, over in Vietnam, we have the Agent Orange and Responsibility campaign. And Agent Orange is a mix of chemicals, and all these mixes contain dioxin. And this dioxin was dropped on the jungle to try to knock the leaves off the trees so we could see the South Vietnamese underneath the trees. North. Yeah, well, they said north, right? And what the problem was that the dioxin remains in the soil and water, as well as the gene pool of those originally that were densed with that dioxin. And that includes Americans and Vietnamese. Now, Agent Orange victims sent a group to the United States, and Veterans for Peace worked with these victims to try to sue the chemical companies that made these chemicals. And that was turned down by a federal judge, and the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. So therefore, the court system, there's going to be no justice through the courts. So Veterans for Peace has changed its tactic, and California Congresswoman Barbara Lee introduced a bill to try to compensate these victims. And she's seeking co-sponsors to that bill to try to move it along through Congress. Now, many veterans return to Vietnam, and they find that to be a healing experience. And one of the veterans that I'm familiar with is called Sewell Jones, because he came to the Bay Area to promote a book, and VFP 101 gave him a venue to speak at and show his book, and this is a really good book. And Sewell said at that meeting that the first time he went back to Vietnam, he was very upset, and he went into the hotel room, and he wouldn't come out for days. He just stayed in the room. And then finally, he got enough strength to come out of the room, and he was walking down the street, and this Vietnamese says, "You were the enemy." And he says, I hung my head and said, "Yes, I was." And the Vietnamese man hugged him and said, "Welcome back." So that's been his experience in Vietnam. And he's one of the founding members of VFP Chapter 160. And VFP members of Chapter 160 work with Friendship Village, providing assistance to the Vietnamese people still affected by dioxin, and also landmines and unexploded ordnance. And Friendship Village is a residential facility providing medical care, physical therapy, and education training to Vietnamese. And that was started in 1988 by American veteran George Mizo in collaboration with Vietnamese and French veterans. And the doors opened in 1998. And Sewell Jones and other members of Chapter 160 have been instrumental in making that work out and helping out doing things. Now, VFP Chapter 160 hosts a 2-week tour of Vietnam every spring for veterans and Americans of goodwill to tour a foreign war-torn country that is now a nation of peace and beauty. And the veterans that go back to Vietnam find this very healing. And Chapter 69 in San Francisco for many years was also arranging tours to go along with this program. So that's something good for veterans to do, to go back to Vietnam and have a healing experience. Now, the chapter projects, VFP 101 has a project we call Truth in Recruiting. And that means we demand recruiters tell the truth and deal with individuals 18 years of age or older. And you know, students often are they're inevitable that they will run into a recruiter at some point in their life, especially now since recruiters have a lot of access to the schools. And we try to tell the students, go ahead, talk to them, but give us 5 minutes first, because we want to advise the students that they need to ask questions. They should know something about the military so they can ask questions about it, and they should know the answers so that if the recruiter tells them the truth, they know he's telling the truth. Maybe they can determine a truthful recruiter. It's like when you buy a car, you have a salesman that's really honest and truthful. He's going to tell you everything good about the car, but don't expect him to tell you anything bad unless you ask him. So you need to know something about the car, or something about cars in general, so you can ask questions and see what he answers. And we also hope to give students alternatives to joining the military. There's a lot of things they can do rather than join the military. And the military tries to make the benefits sound really good. And some people get their benefits and some people don't. There's a member of VFP 101 that joined the Navy and wanted educational benefits. And when she got to her first port or first base, wherever it was, she signed up. She went to sign up, and they said to her, well, it's too soon to sign up. We're only going to be here a really short time. So why don't you wait till you go to your next assignment, and you'll be there longer, you can sign up. So she got to the next assignment, and they said, gee, sorry, you missed the date. The window of opportunity is closed. So she never did get her educational benefits that she had hoped to. So we tell students you have to be aware of the requirements for those benefits, you have to be aware of the deadlines, and you have to be aware that sometimes they change these things without telling you. So you have to keep current and make sure you know what your deadline is going to be. Now, recruiters have access to schools, and Veterans for Peace doesn't really have much access at all. We can be invited by a student or invited by a teacher. And so if you know any students or teachers that would like to hear from Veterans for Peace, we do have members of the chapter that are willing and able to speak to students. VFP 101 partnered with the VFP National and the San Jose Peace and Justice Center and the Peninsula Peace and Justice Center for a project called the Drone Quilt Project. Now, the reason we had the Drone Quilt Project was to put a name and a face on the victims of drones. Now, the military claims that they only kill terrorists, but we know different. We have the names and ages of the victims, some very young victims of drones. And what they do is they find somebody who can sew, you know, people like me and you, and they have them make a square for the quilt. And they have instructions on how to make it. And the name of the victim goes on it, the age of the victim, and the name of, you can put your name on it in some design. And then these squares are mailed to Veterans for Peace and sewn together in a large quilt. Let's see if I have a quilt here. This is what they look like. There's better pictures on the table. So you can look on the table to see the quilts. And then these quilts are taken and displayed, and when we display these quilts, it gives us the opportunity to talk to people and tell them what the United States is doing with drones and how they're actually killing people that couldn't possibly be terrorists. These drones are remotely controlled from any place. There's several places in the United States where they control these drones, and the drones are flying over in the Middle East. So, oops, I did something to my mic. Okay. So Sometimes they make these strikes that are called signature strikes, and they see a large group of men, they decide, oh, it must be terrorists. Well, sometimes it's just a group of men having a city council meeting, and they send the drone in. And then worse, the people that come to assist the victims, they send in a second drone. They call that double tap. Real cute, name for that. And under the Obama administration, 3 American citizens were killed by drone without due process. They weren't charged with a crime. They weren't taken before a judge. They didn't get to meet their accuser. And one of them was 16 years old. And that one for sure couldn't have possibly been a terrorist. He just had gone over looking for his father, his wife, why he was even there in the first place. So members of Veterans for Peace hold vigils and protests at these different sites where drones are controlled. And the big one I'm most aware of is the one at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada. They do that every year, and they get a pretty big gathering there. And I know there's one up by Sacramento, and there's several others across the United States. Now, VFP 101 has a Armistice Day commemoration. In 1918, bells rung around the world to celebrate the war to end all wars.
The end of the war.
The end of the war to end all wars, and we know how well that worked out. But anyway, they rang those bells. And in 1919, President Wilson declared the first commemoration of Armistice Day to be November 11th. And in 1938, Congress made the 11th of November in each year a legal holiday, a day to be dedicated to the cause of world peace and to be thereafter celebrated and known as Armistice Day. Now thereafter lasted till 1954 when Congress changed one word. They changed armistice to veterans, and they changed the day dedicated to the cause of world peace to a day dedicated to war and the warriors that carry it out. So in 2008, VFP Chapter 27 made a proposal at the National Convention, the VFP National Convention, that we try to change that name back and the meaning to what it used to be. And that passed at that convention. Now, Chapter 27 has been ringing bells for 25 years at that point. And it's a chapter project, but it's spreading across the United States. And across the United States, chapters of Veterans for Peace are ringing bells on the morning of November 11th. And in San Jose, we meet on the corner of 4th and Santa Clara in front of City Hall. And at 11 o'clock, we ring a bell 11 times. We have a moment of silence. And then we have a speaker and maybe a little entertainment. And in 30 minutes, it's over. So it's like 11:30, we have this Armistice Day commemoration in San Jose. And I hope you consider joining us next November 11th. Finally, VFP is lucky to have a member, Doug Nelson, who was a Veteran Services representative. And he worked for this county of the VA county of Santa Clara, and he was able to help many people achieve their benefits, because you have to fill out a lot of forms and do a lot of things to get your benefits. And he also dealt with people that had post-traumatic stress disorder, because Doug knows about post-traumatic stress disorder because he's being treated for himself. And in spite of that, he was able to deal with these other people that had the problem too. So in 2013, he wrote a book that describes, gives you some idea if you have post-traumatic stress disorder, and gives you some hints on how to deal with it. And he also included some forms and numbers, but unfortunately, the forms and numbers have changed. So Doug advises people that they should go to their veteran service representative, because that's the people that can help them through this process. But the book is still, it's still a valuable book. It's got the information in it. If you know anybody that has post-traumatic stress disorder, this book is available online from Balboa Press. So I think that's about it. Did I miss anything? And there's papers on the table for you to take, and some other things to look at, and take a look at the the drone quilts, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you. Bob, did you have a question?
Wait till you get the microphone and speak right into it.
You know, I'd like to point out that the Defense Department was once called the War Department.
That's right.
Are you aware of that?
Well, the government's not dumb. They know to change these things. There's been some other things they did. In the Vietnam era, they would send one person at a time to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Now, today, they send whole groups of people, so they feel like they're part of a team, and when they get there, they don't want to leave, and it gives it that cohesion that makes people want to stick together.
Yeah.
The other thing I heard, that during World War II, when they took target practice, they shot at a round bullseye. And they found that the soldiers weren't shooting at people. They were shooting their guns in the air. They didn't want to shoot people. So they've changed that. Now the thing they shoot at is a shape of a person. And they said that they've improved the success of getting people to shoot at people.
I wanted to point out one other thing. The cops and the military are there to protect the wealthy and the powerful. And that's been going on for thousands of years. This is in our genes.
Thank you. I want to express my gratitude for the excellent presentation.
Well, thank you.
I have the greatest respect for Vets for Peace, and I want to reiterate the value of the newspapers that are put out, that are there for free for you to pick up. If you know any teachers, please take one to give to them. Read it first. The writing is excellent. It shows how helpful VFP is for veterans. It gives them a group that they bond with. It encourages creativity in writing and art and cartoons and so forth. It is just an excellent, excellent source. And we need this perspective. Our developing world takes people on reality tours, and we have led a number of them to Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, and we've taken veterans with us. And we have visited in Vietnam the peace villages that are co-sponsored by both U.S. and Vietnamese veterans, working to help people who have horrible disfigurements because of Agent Orange. And it's gone into the third generation. By now it must be the fourth generation. So the cost of war continues and continues and continues. And I remember one young man who said, you know, you didn't have to kill a Vietnamese young man. You didn't have to kill 3 million of us to make us go into a market economy. We could have done that without a war.
So I think Veterans for Peace is largely misunderstood, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to speak today, is because Veterans for Peace is one of the, maybe the only or one of the few veterans groups that says let's end war. And we're for doing it in peaceful means, with peaceful means, and I think that's important.
You put Lockheed out of business?
I want to thank you very much. That was really an excellent presentation. I was aware of your organization, but never heard a presentation on it. I took a lot of notes. Okay, but I did want to just say something that's a curious little tidbit of something for people just to know. I work for the county. I'm at social services, and I went to a presentation of our health carriers. So that was Kaiser, HealthNet, and Valley Plan, the 3 largest ones in the whole county. And they united together in saying that the county workers are the most expensive clients that they have in terms of cancer. 10 times the rate of the general population. And in social services, there is a huge percentage of Vietnamese-born individuals who work for social services. And when I heard that 10 times, which in itself is kind of remarkable, I wondered, what is the correlation between the Vietnam War and all these refugees that came here who were then hired by the county to do all these services for the Vietnamese refugees that came as well. So that was just something that was interesting, that when you said Agent Orange, that brought that up to me.
Right. And I forgot to mention, but I have links to websites for everything I talked about. So if you want to learn more about it or see where I got my information, I have a list up here. You can just put a check by links. And I'm not making any kind of a mailing list. I'm going to throw it away once I send out that list. Or if there's anything else you want, you can write it down on that paper there.
I appreciate your comments about recruiters. And they get me very nervous because they lure people in with half-truths. So yes, indeed, the service does provide training if and when you can access it. But even more than that, there's a piece that they just omit, and that is that education nowadays is all but free. And so if you take a look, San Jose City College and Evergreen Valley College both now have the San Jose Promise, which says virtually all students are going to get their education for free. And if you need more information, I can get you information on that, because I think we need to get that out to people who are seeing students before they see the recruiters, because they lure them in with that promise of free education, and it's out there anyway.
Okay, that would help us. I'd like to get that information.
Are you all sponsoring any lobbyists in Congress?
I don't believe we sponsor lobbyists. We're a 501c3, and I suppose if we, depending what we're sponsoring, but I know of no lobbyists. That it would seem like that would be out of character for what we do.
Thanks, Phil, for your presentation. I had a question. I overheard something. You had mentioned that a declining membership in your group.
Well, we're getting older.
I know, but then I'm wondering, there's a lot of people serving today who maybe aren't involved, and I was wondering if you had any insights as to why the membership is growing older without a new influx of younger
Okay, the younger
military.
veterans are forming their own groups, and a lot of times when they come back, they're not ready to stand up against the war. And I meet a lot of veterans that still want to support the war, and we want to include them in our group. We're trying to do that. And it'd be really good if we get together and have the younger veterans with the older veterans. Because we have members in our group that were from World War II, and they're just getting too old to march. You know, they can't go on the protests and things. And also the Korean War, we have at least one Korean War veteran. I think the youngest guy we have was in the first Gulf War. No, second Gulf War? Okay, second Gulf War. So, but he's probably 50. So he's not really that young. That's young? Okay.
I have one other point to make that's always bothered me. Why isn't in every country you get cooperation among the people for a war?
I don't know.
Whether it's Japan,
they want to
Germany,
be patriotic.
Even in this country, we had tremendous cooperation during the war. War ends, boom.
Well, when I was growing up, I didn't believe that the United States would send me anywhere to do anything wrong. I felt like they must know more than I know, and they just aren't telling me. And that if I went somewhere, I would be making the world a better place. I'd be making America safe. I'd be protecting your freedoms. I didn't do any of that.
It's all BS.
I had a friend who had been in the military, and he made the comment that he thought everybody should be forced to spend a certain amount of time with the kind of people you would never normally run into, and he thought that was a good thing about boot camp. And I was wondering, you're talking about them getting people and sending them over as a group. Are these the sort of people who would normally know each other? Are they losing that experience?
No, they get people, I don't know what they call it, but they get a group of men together and send them over as a unit, rather than one at a time.
You want to explain, they don't send one at a time, but strangers.
Oh, yeah, the groups are strangers, sure. They're strangers to each other, you know, they're in the military doing whatever their job is, it's the same job.
Yes, your presentation was very interesting. It seems to me, you know, as I remember it, and I was just young enough to miss the Vietnam War. I was graduated high school in '73. But the Vietnam War seemed to be one of the things that spurred the counterculture, you know, into, you know, action, you know. So you had, you know, hippies versus the establishment, you know, and you had the civil rights things that were happening at that time. And I think that, you know, when the Vietnam War ended, you know, badly, you know, that it sort of created this schism in society where, you know, the conservatives felt like the hippies won, and to this day they've never gotten over that, you know, that Vietnam cultural rift still exists, you know, continuously from that time on. I was just wondering if you had some comments about that cultural aspect of it.
I really don't. I don't know. Haven't studied that.
Do you think that maybe it's human and even animal nature to fight, to defend your territory, to defend your group? And unfortunately, we left the Garden of Eden, and we learned a lot, and we learned how to kill each other really, really well. And, you know, it's almost like our nature has not grown up with our technical skills.
Well, it might be, but I think that war has become obsolete, and we're going to have to, I think Kennedy said, we either finish war or war finishes us.
You're an optimist.
During the Vietnam War, I founded the draft counseling program there. And for 10 years, I didn't get much sleep because I could not leave those stories at the Peace Center. I brought them home, and I thought about those kids so much. If we still had a draft, we would not have these wars, because people now how many people in this room know somebody in the military? Not many. Not many. Whereas in the Vietnam War, because of the draft, everybody knew somebody who was involved. If we had a draft, we would have a much more democratic country. And in counseling the young men, I was also helping educate families. And especially when the college deferment was dropped, that's when families started getting worried that their kids were going to go to Vietnam. The realities of war have got to be taught in the schools. Our developing world has a lessons page on its website, ourdevelopingworld.org. Please share.
I'm not sure what they're teaching in the schools. I was out of middle school, and I asked this young man that was showing me around what he knew about Vietnam, and he pretty much parroted the government line. And so, I don't know. What do you say about that?
I have two questions. One is about the Vietnam War versus the Iraq and Afghanistan war. It seems like today the recruits are primarily on the lower income and middle income groups, whereas during the Vietnam War, as she was mentioning, there was draft, as well as it affected also the middle income groups. So the distinction between these two types of wars, and I see Vietnam veterans are much more vocal right now, but what happened to the veterans from Iraq and the Afghanistan war? Why not so much voice coming out of that against those wars. And the second one is someone is mentioning that this is in our biological stuff. I see it as a manifest of the patriarchal systems. It's primarily, the wars are primarily patriarchal, and also it's very male-dominated. It's coming from the male. If you see the women as the carrier of our species are primarily, I'm not saying all women, but in general, women are against wars, but men are not. Can you comment on that as well? Thank you.
Well, I think we have an economic draft. It's so tough to get a job these days that people will take a military job because they can't find anything else. And the same thing with education. We're charging students so much money they can never pay it back. And these young people that feel like they can get an education through the military and be able to afford it. So and the other thing is, I believe that what they're teaching in the schools is they're teaching this kind of patriotic thing where they have to agree with whatever the government does. I was at a school once, and over the loudspeaker they played the national anthem. Everybody jumps up and recites the Pledge of Allegiance, and we never did that when I was in school. So I think they're learning how to mold these kids' minds to get them to feel like they have to do that. And the other thing the recruiters do is they have games. They'll tell these kids how many push-ups can you do, how many chin-ups you can do, and they make these kids feel really good, about that. If you get in the military, you can do this and that. So it's a problem. I think we have to look at what our schools are teaching our children. And I don't know why more men would like war than more women. I don't know.
Like Hillary.
Testosterone.
What about Hillary? She liked war, didn't she?
I, as a sort of more recent graduate of the high school system, I'd just like to speak to. So, I grew up in a very poor rural area, and the high school system didn't really prepare kids for colleges super well. So and certainly no one could afford to go to a good school. So it was sort of either the local community college or the military. And I think most people chose, many people in my graduating class chose the military to try to give them both an economic sort of foundation for their lives and also maybe some sort of structure. They didn't want to just be at loose ends after high school, but they felt that they would be completely unprepared for a college experience. And that I feel like it is definitely an economic draft. Like the only people I know who end up going into the military are people whose families couldn't afford for them to do otherwise, for them to have a structure after high school in any other capacity. And also about the Pledge of Allegiance and things, I went to a school, grade schools and high schools and middle schools and everything. Every morning we had to put our hand over our hearts while listening to the national anthem while it played over the loudspeaker and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And you got detention if you didn't do it or if you did anything disrespectful during that time. And no kid I ever met in my high school or grade school experience knew that that hasn't always been the case in America, that it was just a Red Scare product, like relatively recently in the history of our country. They just thought that this is America and that's what we do in America. It's odd.
Brainwashing.
My school days on Long Island, the same. But I don't remember we didn't hear the music, but we all had to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And during my time there, they changed it and put in under God. And starting at 5, I was an atheist, so I wouldn't say that part. That pissed me off. But the rest I would say.
You might have wanted to move a bit further south, then you could have added the Lord's Prayer to that over the PA system for the school.
I still work with high school students. I have for 46 years. I also am quite active in the community where they have the high school color guard and things like that come and be a part of the presentations. And I come from a very poor rural area as well here in California, and I went to segregated schools until 4th grade. And we did the Pledge of Allegiance, and we sang to the national anthem and all of that. And it actually, like you said, it pisses me off. It pisses me off that patriotism has been absconded by warmongers, because I'm very, very patriotic. That's why I'm involved in the community. That's why I wear my We the People button for being involved with the elections. And I voted every single time in my life since I turned 18, as have my brothers and my parents before me. And I believe in the American flag, and I'm a pacifist. And my mother was a pacifist. And all of my cousins are vets. They were in the Vietnam War, drafted or they volunteered. And we have interesting conversations like this because their children wanted to go into the military. And not one of my cousins, young men, and we tend to be men heavy in my family, I'm 3 brothers, only cousin, female cousin, went into the military because of that passive strain about believing in working for your community and being involved in your community. So I think that we have a culture of bullying and of belittling. And when I see these young people in there, there's a day when those color guards wear their camouflage and their uniforms, and they go to school, and they get to wear them at school, and you can see them walking to school. And I've watched this because I've been at a red light, and I watched them cross the street to go to high school, with this kind of, look at me. They stand there self-consciously on the corner, very proud that they're like that on their way to go to school and do their marching and that kind of stuff, because they're being brainwashed that this gives them self-esteem. This makes them important. This makes them feel like they're making a difference. We need to do something to replace that. That's action-oriented for men who are action-oriented. Women think a lot before they take action. Men want action. And I think that's why they tend to go to war. I don't know.
Well, I don't know about, I think it's very patchy about when people did that in school. I was in a one-room schoolhouse in about 1942 for the first 4 grades, and we always did that. We always did the Pledge of Allegiance and the whole thing. And when I went to a bigger school, to the higher grades, they didn't do it anymore. And I still think maybe it was something that our teacher did because, well, she was very old, and I think it was what was done maybe in her day. So it's spotted whether or not you were at a time in a place where they did that.
When I was in elementary school, it was after Under God had been inserted into the Pledge of Allegiance, but I only heard about that much later. I mean, that it was inserted and why. I went to a private school in Palo Alto that was not religious, and they never required and asked us to say that, and so I never thought about it, and I'm hearing all these people sitting it out. And as you said, I just kept my mouth closed during that phrase.
Hi, I'm Phil's wife. I just wanted to mention, he mentioned that there were, the young people are starting their own groups, and I don't think he said enough about that. I don't know if he wants to say more, but there's a group called the Iraq Veterans Against the War. There's a group called Courage to Resist. I think there's maybe several others. And there is resistance. There's a lot of people speaking out against the Iraq and the Afghanistan wars, the young people that are coming back, the veterans.
Is there any effort on the Vietnam veterans, the group you are representing, to integrate with the Iraq veterans and the Afghan veterans who are also working for peace?
We'd be happy to do that, and I think the National tries to include them in the conventions and things, so we are working on doing that.